Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hello and welcome to episode number 240 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Lei Meng, Fiona and Merbles, Lauren Ho, Rashika Carlson, Shannon Manning, and Emily Mills. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week, our film review is The Watchers, also known as The Watched. The Watchers / The Watched was released in 2024. It has 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb and 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. The Watchers, also known as The Watched, God, that's really annoying already, and I'm only 2 seconds into this film review, follows Mina, a 28-year-old artist who gets stranded in an expansive, untouched forest in Western Ireland. When Mina finds shelter, she unknowingly becomes trapped alongside 3 strangers that are watched and stalked by mysterious creatures each night. And I feel like this film review might ruffle a few feathers. I sort of thought when I posted this review on Instagram and Facebook, I thought, people are going to be like, yeah, boo, we didn't like this film. Gross. But actually, lots of people liked it. So I'm sorry if you liked this film. I did not like it. And please don't send me hate mail. Please, I beg of you. So as always with these film reviews, we're going to start with our likes. And I love anything that is akin to fairy lore, changeling lore, weird shit happening in the woods, Celtic folklore and mythology. Hook it to my veins, This isn't really a spoiler. Like, I'm pretty sure the posters for this movie give away what's going on and what the creatures are. But I was like, props to them, props to them for turning a book that leaned into the idea of fairies, the idea of fairies not being these cute little winged creatures, that they can be dark and powerful and scary. Props to them for taking this book and turning it into a movie. So this film is based on a book. I haven't read the book, so full disclosure, I don't know how the book and the film compare. I've heard very good things about the book. Sinead and I went to see this film because we were, I was quite excited about it coming out, and Sinead was quite excited because she had read the book and enjoyed it. And I'd sort of figured, yeah, this is going to be some sort of cool fairy lore. I'm game for that. I love a horror film that takes like much romanticized Irish folklore and mythology and goes, ha ha ha, this is actually far more scary than you thought it was. And another thing that I loved is that, gosh, Ireland really is beautiful. It really is beautiful. And it always makes me happy when I see it on film or I see it in pictures. Like, it's actually beautiful and not in a romanticized way. I feel like they really captured that on film. So the film was directed by Ishana Shyamalan, so M. Night Shyamalan's daughter. He produced it, she directed it. And I think she did a really good job of capturing the beauty of Ireland and also capturing the beauty that is alongside this terrible, quite frightening isolation that takes place in the film. I also felt like Ishana Shyamalan did some really lovely camera work in this film too. So in the beginning, Dakota Fanning, who is our protagonist, she's having conversations with people and you never really see their faces, which was very cleverly done. I didn't notice it at first. It was Sinead who said, oh, we can't see the faces of the people that she's speaking to. They're like blurred or obscured. And it was really well done, really clever. A little clever piece of foreshadowing, I think. I also really liked the parrot. That was me clutching at straws, I think, when I was writing my likes column, to be honest. But there is a parrot in this film who I would argue is maybe the protagonist. I think the parrot is the main character. But I liked the parrot. I like a film that includes a parrot as a plot point. It's not often seen, but I feel like it's very important. And that was sort of where my likes column ended. And the dislikes column was quite large comparatively. So like I said, right, I have not read this book. I believe the book is very good. I haven't read it myself. But I do feel like the film did not translate well. The film felt like impossibly slow. I got quite bored. And then the whole last 15-20 minutes was full of exposition, like people giving big long explanations as to why things were happening in the film, and I was like, oh God, why didn't we have this spaced out throughout the film? The last 20 minutes needed so much explanation that it completely slowed the pace down in what should have been like a climactic ending to the film. It ended up being too dialogue heavy and too exposition heavy because the rest of the film didn't seem to be paced properly, and it really annoyed me. It felt like, you're trying to squeeze in this expansive part of Irish folklore that is nuanced and dark and gritty and has real world consequences, like genuinely had real world consequences for many years. I've done episodes before, like the episode of Bridget Cleary, where women were murdered for being changelings. Like this stuff was serious, and it happened, and it had real world consequences, and it had a whole history of folklore and storytelling. And I just don't think you can kind of try and squeeze that into a few monologues, because I just don't think that it translates well. And I'm quite shocked to say that Dakota Fanning can't act. Did people know that? Because I don't feel like I knew that. I have seen her. She was in films when she was a child. I know that she was in Twilight. But she did not do a good job as the pivotal role in this film. I really was like, oh, Dakota, I'm just going to say it. I'm not concerned about whether you go out into the forest at nighttime and get eaten or whatever it is that happens. I'm not concerned. I'm far more concerned about the welfare of the parrot. And maybe she can act. Like maybe this was because the dialogue was truly terribly written. The dialogue was not good. And as a result, the final showdown, the climax, as well as being heavy on the exposition, it ended up being really cheesy. And bits of it made me laugh, which they really just shouldn't have. They just shouldn't have made me laugh. And I just think that fundamentally, like as a whole, the exposition around fairy lore in Ireland was weak. It left a huge amount to be desired. And I felt like it needed to be more. It needed to be throughout the film rather than all thrown in at the end in this weird, messy blob of information. I just felt like, in short, the fairies deserved better, They deserved to have their story told better. And I am going to say something that is a mild spoiler for this film. So if you're planning on going to see it and you don't want a mild spoiler, then skip forward, maybe 60 seconds. Okay. I'm going to say it now. Don't have sex with things that you are not meant to have sex with. Okay? If you are going to make, for example, some sort of genetic mutant creature and raise it in secret as your child, don't have sex with it. We learned that during the film Splice. We learned that. They learned that in the film the hard way, pardon the pun. Similarly, in this film, there's this implication that, dear God, if it exists, no matter in what form, a man will have sex with it. So I would advise against that. So yeah, The Watchers / The Watched wasn't a good one for me. I didn't enjoy it. I'm gonna give it 1.5 stars, and half of those stars are for the parrot.
Life is full of what-ifs. Some awesome, like what if AI could fold your laundry? And some, well, less awesome, like what if you have unexpected medical costs? United Healthcare can help get you covered with Health Protector Guard fixed indemnity insurance plans. They supplement your primary plan to help you manage out-of-pocket costs. No deductibles, no enrollment periods, and especially no more what-ifs. Visit uh1.com to find the Health Protector Guard plan for you.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Which brings us to our story this week. Now, it has been a while since we have ventured into the world of UFOs and aliens, and today's story is an alien UFO story. Now, I know there will be people out there that will be groaning. They'll be going, no, not an alien UFO story. But I promise this one is genuinely a good one. So earlier this week, the lovely people over at the BBC reached out to me and said, hey, we've got a new series coming out called Paranormal, The Village That Saw Aliens. And it is by Sian O'Leary, who did the last series that I talked about from the BBC, which was Paranormal, The Girl, The Ghost and The Gravestone, which I really enjoyed. And guess what? I really enjoyed this one too. Genuinely, I'm not being paid to say this. I watched it. I enjoyed it. I decided to do an episode about it because I thought it was a really interesting story, and I genuinely really enjoyed the series. Like with Paranormal, The Girl, The Ghost and The Gravestone, I felt like it was really balanced. Do you know what I mean? I felt like watching Sian O'Leary talk to witnesses and go and interview people, etc., etc. She would come away and go, I feel like I find it really hard to believe that person, and I find it really difficult to believe that element of the story, and I feel like we need to investigate it more, because I do think a lot of paranormal documentaries and series don't perhaps always look at things with a skeptical eye, which I do think is important. And I think this series does that, genuinely, and I was entertained by it. It's on BBC iPlayer at the moment, so if it sounds like it's up your street, definitely I would recommend watching it. There's 4 episodes, and I think it's about 2 hours long altogether, so it's not going to take up a huge amount of your time. But I really enjoyed it, so let's jump into the story. I have a vivid memory of being a child and my mum came home from having been somewhere. She said that she'd been sitting in the car waiting for my dad and was absent-mindedly looking at the stars when she saw a star that seemed to be glowing brighter than all the others. Suddenly, this star streaked off across the sky at incredible speed and left a trail of light behind it. The trail stayed in the sky for ages after the light had disappeared. I remember her talking about this without any sense of fear, just curiosity, I suppose. She just thought it was a strange and interesting thing to see. I was immediately terrified and was utterly convinced that it was aliens, and that we'd all be abducted from our beds, or I'd wake up and E.T. would have followed some invisible trail of Skittles to my bedroom. Or was it M&M's? I digress. I talked to my mum pretty much daily on the phone, and when I rang her today while walking home from the shop, she asked me what I was doing, what I was researching for this week's episode. I told her I had to watch a new TV series and I was writing an episode about it. When I told her what the series was about, she said, Jesus, I remember that being all over the news. That was a huge story at the time. To be honest, I was surprised. The paranormal or UFOs isn't really my mum's bag, and I was surprised that she remembered it, which to me is demonstrative of the fact that it really was a huge and compelling story at the time. And having watched this series, I can really see why. It was Friday the 4th of February 1977 in the little Welsh village of Broadhaven, and it was a cold and wet day. In the Broadhaven Primary School on the southwest coast of Wales, David Davis was inside reading because he had no interest in being outside in said cold and wet on his cherished break time. As with all break times, children were running in and out of the classroom, grabbing pieces of fruit or hiding from other children. David didn't take much notice until the children seemed to be running in and out with more frequency, and they seemed wild-eyed and feverish with excitement. But there was an undercurrent of something else. It was fear. David stopped reading and started listening to what the other children were saying. A spaceship. They had seen a spaceship land in the field beyond the playground, and it was rising above the trees and lowering back down behind the trees, as though it were trying and failing to take off. At the time, David was not bothered to go and look, but as the day went on, the curiosity overtook him, and when the bell went at the end of the day, he made his way to the end of the playground, where a fence delineated it from the land beyond. He stood at the fence for a moment, slightly giddy, with strange apprehension, even though he didn't really believe what the other kids were saying. He had swung one leg over the fence when he saw it. An object rose up above the trees, silvery and cigar-shaped, and 40 to 50 feet long. David was utterly transfixed, but he didn't feel afraid. He watched the object frozen with one leg still swung over the fence, and suddenly he was completely overwhelmed with the desperate urge to run away. So he clambered down from the fence and fled. 16 school children claimed to have seen this cigar-shaped UFO. It was allegedly half a mile away from the playground. Unsurprisingly, no one believed them, but they were so insistent that on Monday morning the head teacher of the school sat all the children down in exam conditions and asked them to draw what they saw. And all the children drew the same thing. These children were not excited about what they had seen. They were terrified. One of the children was afraid to go to the toilet alone, and another was utterly convinced that he was going to be disintegrated by something from outer space. This was not a light-hearted bit of fun for these children. They were genuinely afraid. Whatever they had seen had a massive impact on them. The story of the 16 Broadhaven school children hit the headlines. But in reality, that wasn't even the beginning of the story. Witnesses poured in, people from all walks of life, people of all ages and from all professions, seeing lights and cigar-shaped crafts in the sky. Rosa Granville was a local woman who owned a hotel in the area. She was Spanish, and at night time she loved nothing more than to unwind while listening to Spanish radio. As she was sitting up in bed listening to the radio, it began to crackle and hiss and eventually cut out altogether. She was confused and reached over to turn it on and off again. She heard a faint noise outside and got up and put on her dressing gown. She padded softly across the bedroom floor. There was now an eerie silence, and as she pulled back the curtains, her bedroom was illuminated. A huge light lowering from the sky. It was silent and it was huge. It landed at the end of her property next to a grassy ridge. She was frozen, watching in complete shock. What the hell was she seeing? This thing was cigar-shaped, and that wasn't all that she saw. She watched in horror as two beings emerged from the craft, two creatures. Rosa would describe them as monsters. They were tall, 7 to 8 feet tall, and they had disproportionately long arms and legs. Their limbs were long and thin. Both creatures were wearing what looked like silver boiler suits. They emerged from the craft and made their way up the grassy bank. Rosa's blood ran cold when the creatures seemed to turn to her and look straight at her. At least, that is what it seemed like, because the creatures didn't seem to have any discernible facial features. These monsters seemed to survey the area, and at this point, Rosa Granville called the police. She was petrified and had no idea what was happening. A police officer actually attended the scene and seems to have done a pretty thorough job of assessing the situation. He investigated the area and saw no signs that anything had landed in the area, but he didn't just end his investigation there. He went to the local RAF base and asked them to check for any aircraft on their radar. There was nothing. But when this police officer was interviewed about this experience years later, he stated that he believed her. He didn't know what it was that she saw, but she saw something. He said that she was absolutely terrified when he arrived, and he knew that something had happened. Interestingly, later investigation uncovered a concrete bunker in the area, and this bunker was used by the Royal Observer Corps, whose job it was to identify, track and report any aircraft that were flying over British skies. In later years, this story was allegedly debunked. A local businessman came forward and claimed responsibility for this sighting. He said that he had attended a fancy dress party and had borrowed an asbestos-lined silver boiler suit from a local oil refinery for the occasion, and had played a prank by walking around the area late at night. Lots of people had assumed that this is the mystery solved, but not Rosa's daughter. She maintained that yes, there had been a fancy dress party. In fact, a bartender at the party had called Rosa at the hotel to warn her and her husband that some boiler suit wearing guys were planning on playing a prank and scaring some people. The boiler suit clad guests made their way to the hotel and stood outside and moved on pretty quickly when Rosa's husband went outside to ask them to. There was no drama, there was no fighting, that was it. And this happened months before Rosa had her experience. And it wasn't the only experience that happened at the hotel. One night, Rosa, her daughter, and the staff of the hotel watched as an orange pulsating light moved across the bay. It then turned to reveal that it was a disc-shaped object, and it lowered and disappeared into the sea. Rosa was determined not to be caught out this time, and she called her neighbour Pauline Coombs, who had also been watching the same orange pulsating light, except she said it didn't just lower into the sea. It lowered into a small, empty, rocky outcrop just off the coast. And this was not Pauline's first encounter with these strange lights either. One night, Pauline was driving home with her little ones in the car when they saw something in the sky. It was her son in the back seat who spotted it first and pointed it out. She described it as being like a light that emitted a beam from a torch. It began to follow the car. Pauline began to panic. She drove faster, and the light kept up. The headlights of the car began to flicker and dim. The children were screaming, "It's going to hit us, Mom! It's going to hit us!" The chase ensued, and finally the engine and the lights cut out completely. Pauline freewheeled the car into her driveway, and they sprinted out of the car and into the house for safety. At 1 a.m. on Sunday the 6th of February, Louise Bassett was driving home an hour away from Broadhaven. It was 2 days after the school children had had their mass sighting, but the information was not public knowledge as yet. As Louise was driving, her car radio began to crackle and cut out, until it eventually cut out altogether. She approached her home and noticed a huge silvery cigar-shaped object in the sky. She pulled her car over, got out and watched the object traverse across the sky. She was completely perplexed by the events, and when she got home, her phone rang. It was her neighbour, John Petts, who was an artist. "Louise, this is going to sound strange, but there was something over your house and I drew it." He had drawn a dark sky and a large silvery cigar-shaped object. But how do we know all of this information? And how do we have access to all of these eyewitness accounts? Well, a man named Randall Jones Pugh was deeply interested in this story and made it his mission to find and document eyewitness testimonies, and he had gathered boxes and boxes of documents and recordings of the Welsh UFO phenomenon throughout his life. But he suddenly stopped researching after dedicating a huge portion of his life to finding out more about the strange things in the skies over East Wales. He just stopped. His daughter remains convinced to this day that someone paid him a visit. Someone in an official capacity that had warned him off his research. And that Randall Jones Pugh was genuinely frightened of this visitor, or who this visitor came in the name of, or the information that he had found out. And Randall wasn't the only person who had these visits from people of an allegedly official capacity. Writer Neil Spring wrote and researched extensively about the Broadhaven UFOs and believed that there was something strange happening at Broadhaven. He believed that it wasn't just Randall who had been warned, but numerous people involved claimed to have been visited by people who were acting in an official capacity and were, at the very least, threatening in their behaviour. There were claims of posts being intercepted and people hearing suspicious clicks on their phone lines. And the sightings didn't just disappear, they increased and spread throughout East Wales from 1977 to the early 1980s. One of the most startling events occurred on January the 13th, 1983. In Swansea, a girl named Natalie came home from school and was in her kitchen doing her normal post-school routine. At around 6:30 p.m, she felt this strange urge to go outside her front door. And with no idea really why she was doing it, she walked through the house and out the front door and into the street. The street was engulfed in a deep and surreal silence. She looked up, and hovering over the house opposite was a huge, silvery, cigar-shaped object. On the street, neighbours were standing wide-eyed and open-mouthed, staring at this thing in the sky. Natalie stood in deep silence, watching the object, and then all of a sudden it was gone. She didn't blink and it disappeared. It didn't shoot off into the sky. It just simply vanished. When the object was gone, Natalie looked around as if coming out of a trance, and all the neighbours were gone. A week later, when Natalie was washing her hair, she found a bald patch on her head, with a hard lump underneath that had never been there before. Now, it might seem easy to roll your eyes at Natalie's story and say that it is far-fetched. It was clearly a dream, or was it a psychotic episode? Except that neighbours with no connection to Natalie also confirmed that they had seen the same thing on that night in January 1983. And then there were all the people who witnessed it and called the police. Official police logs showed that over 200 people reported seeing a craft or strange flashing lights in the sky over Wales that night. One of the reports was from a man who was putting his children to bed and his wife was out. He had put the children to bed and was downstairs watching television when all of a sudden the power went out with no warning. He went to the window to see if the power was out in the street, and there was a huge craft in the sky with 3 lights in the shape of a triangle. He watched it for a while in complete shock, and then went upstairs to check on the children. The reports were all the same. People reporting seeing lights in the shape of a triangle that moved steadily and silently across the sky, and then suddenly shot off at an unnatural speed. Whatever your thoughts are about UFOs and alien life forms and spaceships and space travel, whether you are a staunch believer, whether you don't believe in them at all, whether you think the stories are silly, something strange happened in the skies over Wales in the 70s and 80s. There are, of course, many theories and thoughts about this series of events, but how could so many people have all seen the same thing? Is it possible that they were all mistaken? I'm sure that there are people who are listening to this episode, right, who are listening to this and going, yeah, shit, I remember that happening. I remember that being on the news, whether you're from the UK or Ireland or Northern Ireland, and you're like, yeah, I remember those news stories. Christ, because there were a lot of news stories. Like, this was really widely covered at the time. So to give you an example of how kind of prolific these stories were, when Randall Jones Pugh, when he sort of decided to stop investigating these stories, like that in itself was a news story. So him deciding to give up investigating these stories was a news story in itself. So I feel like kind of every inch of this story was on a newspaper at some point. And I do love a story that captures the zeitgeist at the time, you know, that everybody is like in the consciousness of the public. There will be a memory of this story. I'm a big fan of stories like that. I think from the off, one of the big things that people always say is who benefited from this story. Did anybody make money, any of the witnesses, or did any of the kids gain anything? No, is the answer. It doesn't look like anybody in this story gained anything from saying that they witnessed this phenomena. It doesn't look like there was any money that was made. And actually, you know, the children who, or at least some of the children, I can't say that all of the children who were involved in this story, were mercilessly bullied for what they claimed to have seen that day. And you can understand how that would happen. You know, children can be cruel, teenagers can be cruel. And if there is something about you that stands out, sometimes it means that you are a target for others. And it seems that these children maintained their stories. On that same note, however, I don't think all the pictures that the kids drew look the same. To be honest, I just don't think they all look the same. Because people were like, all of these pictures were the exact same, and they all drew the exact same spaceship. I mean, I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. And I do think it's important to point out the timeline. So, you know, the kids saw this object on Friday, but they didn't actually draw what they saw until Monday. And a lot of people pointed out that there was plenty of time over the weekend to like chitter chatter about what they had seen, or, you know, to collaborate on their stories. And the witnesses, the like child witnesses who are obviously now adults, maintained that that's not what happened, that they didn't collaborate over the weekend, that the kids didn't hang out over the weekend and say, oh, let's make sure all of our stories are straight. But I do think that maybe your thoughts about something can change over a weekend, or you might have seen something and then, you know, you have the weekend to ruminate and think on it, and you know, because this is what humans do, you exaggerate in your own brain, or you add details and are convinced that that is what actually happened. And I think that would be, you know, a standpoint to take if nobody else had seen anything, if it was just these children who had had this encounter, who had seen something. And I do believe the kids saw something, but you could say, if it was just the children, you could say it was a misidentification. They had the weekend, they, you know, built it up in their heads over the weekend, etc., etc. If it was just the kids, you could maybe kind of, dust your hands off and go, mystery solved. These children saw a blimp and they weren't used to seeing a blimp, and then they added to the story over the weekend, and in their little brains they misremembered. Here we are, all these years later. But it just seems to me that something weird was going on in the skies over Wales. I think the question is what it was. I don't think whether or not it happened is in question. I think something weird was happening over the sky in Wales in the 70s and 80s. I just think the question is what? So I do think the kids saw something, in short. What that is, I don't know. There's going to be a lot of I don't know in this episode. So for the I don't know haters out there, God, you're really not going to enjoy this. Rosa then is kind of our next witness, Rosa Granville, and she claims that she was in bed listening to the radio. The radio began to like static and hiss and eventually cut out altogether. She was like, what the heck? Got up, looked out the window, and there was a huge light that was silent, and then the monsters, as she called them, these like 7 to 8 foot tall monsters in silver boiler suits. If I was putting my really critical hat on, my really skeptical hat on, I would probably say, maybe it was like sleep paralysis or a dream or something. But the fact that the radio cutting out is so consistent with the other stories, that makes me feel like there's more to it than just writing it off as she imagined it, she dreamed it. And I can understand why that guy came out in later years, that businessman, and was like, oh, actually, that was me in my asbestos-lined fucking costume. That blew my mind. Just had to add that in there because I was like, asbestos-lined? Was your costume party a death wish? Gosh, the 70s and 80s was a wild time. But I digress. I imagine this guy saw that story and was like, oh yeah, that was that night me and my friends were out, having the crack, whatever. But Rosa's daughter, when she spoke about this, was like, yeah, that was a completely different night and was months before. And they were literally just men in suits standing outside the hotel. They didn't arrive in a spaceship that descended from above in a huge beam of light and then climb out of it. I mean, that'd be impressive for a fancy dress party, would it not? But they didn't do that. That was, weeks before. But is it possible that that experience sort of informed a dream that Rosa had? I mean, she absolutely did not seem to think so. And it really profoundly impacted her. And it would make so much sense, right? If the police officer who came out to investigate went to the local RAF and was like, look, has anything been on your radars in the last, couple of hours or so? And they said, oh yeah, we had sent somebody out to the bunker that's out there, the little concrete bunker for the air traffic corps, observation corps place. Or we were doing a drill and it involved going out to that bunker place that's out there, and that's why somebody was out. Then you'd be like, oh, no wonder. Like, of course, completely understand why she would think that it was something otherworldly, especially if they were in a special type of uniform or doing a drill or whatever. But it doesn't seem like there was anything kind of routine or run-of-the-mill about it. And I mean, similar to the kids who had the experience, like Rosa Granville was obviously terrified by what she saw. And I believe that she saw something. I just don't know what that something was. And like I said, it's the radio crackling that really gets it for me. So many of these stories seem to involve radios crackling, the power going out, like the car shutting down, the headlights flickering before the car shut off. So something electrical, like something powerful, was happening. And in the case of Rosa Granville, you could say, she just sort of happened to see this thing happening. It wasn't as if they were inside the hotel, or even when she saw the orange pulsating light out on the bay. It wasn't kind of aimed or directed at her, but her neighbour, Pauline Coombs, like that thing following her car home, and then the lights and the power cutting out in the car. Like, that's threatening and scary. And I did think for a long time when I was watching this documentary, like, was this some sort of military weapon that was being tested over Wales? But if that was the case, right, would you really be threatening local people with this weapon or making people feel threatened. I really don't know that you would. And this thing was obviously powerful. If it could cut off the power in the car, if it could, as we saw in the later story, cut off the electricity in a house, it was obviously something that was powerful. And the very nature of the way that it moved, the fact that this thing moved completely silently and was able to hover completely silently and then could shoot off into the distance really quickly. There was a lot of conversation about whether or not this thing was a blimp, because there are pictures of blimps, you know, as silvery cigar-shaped kind of objects, and when they're lit up, it looks like triangular lights. But blimps don't have the ability to move as quickly as what people were describing. And I think that maybe if this thing moved slowly and silently over the sky, or it was cloudy, or it was dark when people saw it, I would think, yeah, this probably was a blimp. But the way that it moved doesn't lend itself to the way that blimps move. And you're telling me that 200 people report seeing the same object on the same night, and that's only the people that took the time to report it. I'm sure there was plenty of other people who saw it and didn't report it. So those 200 people all completely mistook a blimp for some sort of crazy fast moving spaceship. Personally, I just don't see it. And in the series, right, they talk to the Air Force, or they try and talk to the Air Force and say, hey, like, what was going on here? And they get a really snidey, snarky kind of piss-taken answer back, where the Air Force were like, I can assure you there were no spacecraft, and if there were, we'd charge them the same amount as we charge everybody else. And it's like, yeah, I get it, you're trying to be tongue-in-cheek and funny, but also this is something that happened and upset people, and something was happening, and you being smart arses about it doesn't change that. And if the RAF could turn around, or, you know, whoever it was that was involved could turn around and say, oh, actually, yeah, we were testing the use of blimp, or blimps, I don't know what the plural of blimp is, for, you know, this use in combat or war or military tactics or whatever. That's what it was. That's what we were doing. Fine. Brilliant. Then you could say that's what it was. That's what happened. But they haven't. They didn't. And there's a part of me that kind of, when I was watching this, I thought, this is definitely something military that was being tested. There's loads of like military bases around that area. This is something military. And, you know, previously the military have encouraged people to think that they were seeing UFOs when they were in fact testing military weapons, like during the Cold War. Like, this has happened before, where they've been like, yeah, UFOs, that's definitely what it was that you saw, because they didn't want other forces to know what weapons they had and were testing. But there's something about this story that is just off. One of the experts that was interviewed in the series said that when you had, you know, situations where the military were testing new equipment, you will generally see that equipment and technology within 20 years. And there aren't any military technologies that I'm aware of that can move at the speed that these lights were moving. I don't know what was happening in the sky over Wales in the 70s and 80s. I mean, maybe there's people in Wales, maybe there's people in Broadhaven who have more understanding or experience and aren't saying anything. I'm always kind of reluctant to believe these kind of loose, ambiguous stories about military officials coming to people's doors and being like, you need to, I don't know, shut your mouth and stop talking about this thing that you saw. I just don't know that the military would be so, or even the government would be so heavy-handed to send out threatening goons for something that they really wanted to keep a secret. I just don't know if that's what would happen. Although, you know, what do I know? I wasn't there. I didn't have these experiences. Who knows? But listen, go and watch the series. There's loads more information in there that I didn't include in the episode, little tidbits that might be interesting. And it's called The Paranormal, The Village That Saw Aliens. It's on BBC iPlayer. It is really, really a good series. Very balanced, very well done. I really like Shanna Larry. I really like her style. I recommend it. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Remember, if you would like to send in your spooky story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Imagine the softest sheets you've ever felt. Now imagine them getting even softer over time. That's what you'll feel with Boll & Branch's organic cotton sheets. In a recent customer survey, 96% replied that Boll & Branch sheets get softer with every wash. Start getting your best night's sleep in these sheets that get softer and softer for years to come. Try their sheets with a 30-night guarantee. Plus, get 15% off your first order at bollandbranch.com. Code BUTTERY. Exclusions apply. See site for details.